Welcome back to our fifth installment of The Dry Wood by Caryll Houselander. I'm going to try and go for 2 hours tonight, if I can. I've been going for just an hour. We're starting at chapter 11, called Benediction. The quote at the beginning of the chapter: "O saving victim, opening wide the gate of heaven to man below." On the second day of the novena, Willie became so much worse that Martha sent word to Father O'Grady asking him to come. A rumor had already gone round that the child was dying, and the prayers of the people rose in a crescendo. They crowded to the weekday benediction to pray together. Father O'Grady sent Tim Houselander to carry a note by hand to Father Smith, assistant priest of the next parish, asking him if he would forgive the short notice, and could he oblige by coming over to take benediction, as he himself was called out. The next parish was a long way off, but Father Smith was in sympathy with the cause of Father Malone. He was a young, simple, red-faced priest who had burnt candles in front of Father Malone's photograph on the side and was joining in the novena. Benediction was at 4. At 3:30, the church was full, the benches crowded, the people kneeling in the aisles. Even on Sunday nights or on the great feasts, there were seldom so many, although it is in benediction that hundreds find the only visible beauty that shines out on the drabness of their lives, like stars burning into a gray twilight. It is an easy and sweet ceremony, with the singing of hymns and the relief of prayers spoken out loud, a sweetness, a gentleness, a goodness to the little flock. That's a beautiful phrase, the relief of prayer spoken out loud. The church was noisy. The people had come early because they were restless and unsettled. How could they remain quietly at home or at work while waiting for a miracle? A miracle that was to break upon the moment of crisis. Everyone was whispering. Some stood at the back of the church in little knots, talking in murmurs. There was a continual tramping of feet as more and more came in. Each one who came was stopped in the aisle by an outstretched hand from the benches, 3, 4, 5 times on their way up to their seat, and plied with the eager, breathless questions. "How is he? Have you news? Is he worse? They say he is sinking. Have you heard? Lord, spare the child to us. Lord, pity the dying. What is the news of him? They say he is in agony. Have you news of him? Christ be with him. Mother Mary, comfort him. Sweet child Jesus, be with him." The organist, Miss Mulligar, an eccentric old lady whose want of balance was charitably attributed to her talent for music, was blowing up the organ. She invariably put ribbons in her hat according to the liturgical colors of the day, but for benediction, white. The organ wheezed and panted, like a dragon coming round from an anesthetic. Like a dragon. Oh gosh, that is great. Now and then, when a sudden gust of enthusiasm took Miss Mulligar, it lingered in a long wheeze, so like her usual tremulous opening bar to the O Salutaris Hostia, that everyone flung onto their knees only to find that there was nothing happening at all. In benediction, when you hear O Salutaris Hostia, it's a signal to kneel down for the blessing, the benediction. The school children, allowed out early for the midweek benediction, came in whispering and jostling one another, and fidgeted in the front benches like flocks of quarrelsome sparrows. Behind them, the Sisters of Charity, with their great white coifs, followed, like a fleet of sailing ships riding proudly on calm waters. Presently a boy came in bearing a star on a reed and began to light the candles on the altar. It was Jimmy Hogan, a tough child, respected for his punch, and the terror of the lads of his own size, not much of a size, for miles around, but the friend of stray cats, dogs, and sparrows, and known to the Riverside sporting world as the best tiddler fisher of the century. But now he was indistinguishable from a young angel, blue-eyed, flaxen-haired, his face scrubbed to a glossy apple rosiness, vested in a snowy white surplice over an unrubical but beautiful cherry red cassock. Unrubrical. One by one he lit the multitude of candles. It was as if he touched 1,000,000 buds in a celestial meadow with the Star of Bethlehem, and they bloomed with its holy fire. Now and then he had to return to one that had faltered, one that winked and flickered and must be coaxed and petted into light. And everyone watched with absurd suspense, as when people listen to a singer in terror of nervous apprehension that his high note will not come off. When the stars were lit, the tensity, the expectation in the church was almost unbearable. The people could hardly wait now for the door of the tabernacle to be opened and the Lord to be borne out among them and lifted up. They were waiting with the same desire, doubt, hope, faith, with the same longing to believe, to be convinced, to see, with which the crowds in Jerusalem waited the coming of Christ in their narrow streets. The beating of their inarticulate hearts hammered on the leaf-light door of gold. Lord, that I may see. Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. At last the bell rang out, a sudden clatter of silver over the heads of the people, and they flung down on their knees to stay on them. Books and rosaries and pennies were dropped. Some last-comers clattered in at the double and threw themselves down with such violence that it seemed they must have broken the bench. The organ, with a sustained wail like the escape of a captive beast at the last gasp of life, began the O Salutaris Hostia in earnest. The congregation were not singers. Usually there would be just one robust old man letting off his rage at the tepidity of the others in a tuneless roar, and one tremulous old lady quite unconscious of the others, uttering a quavering solo, but for the rest only a few moans and false starts. Father O'Grady, who would have liked a good volume of sound, had to console himself with the wise old saying, "Where there are many hymns, there is much heresy." But today everyone sang. It was the loudest, the most tuneless, the most reckless, the most unself-conscious, the most fervent singing that had ever been heard in Father O'Grady's church. It swept over little Father Smith as he came in with his eyes shut, his biretta on the back of his head, and his alb bunched up in the manner so distressing to Monsignor Frayne. It seemed impossible to him that with such intensity, such wheezing and roaring and sighing and sweating and prayer, the miracle would not be granted this afternoon. He unlocked the tabernacle door and lifted out the sacred host. Walking carefully and slowly, as St. Joseph might have done when Our Lady put the divine child into his arms to carry, he went behind the altar, up the tiny steps, and set the great monstrance on its throne. Again there was a lurching forward, a rattling and creaking and dropping as the congregation plunged and dived down into adoration. The heads of the children went down, the rows of the boys' heads like round knobs of unpolished wood. One tiny little girl, a first communicant of the year, squinted through her locked fingers and screwed up her eyes to see the gilded rays of the monstrance, blurred as if they were real glory. Everyone whispered, "My Lord and my God," pronouncing the words with their lips to gain an indulgence for the holy souls in purgatory. The breath of their adoration came out of their mouths in little puffs like incense and warmed their cold fingers as it passed up to God. Father Smith began the recital of the joyful mysteries. The people gripped their rosaries tighter, seizing the beads so hard between their fingers that their fingers cracked. Their lips moved faster and faster, some whispering with a hiss like kettles spitting at boiling point, some with their muttered prayers caught in a kind of loose, grumbling rattle in their throats, all gathering speed as they went on, their lips moving faster and faster and faster, as if their prayers were running, rushing to God, trying to race death and to throw it back from the very gates of eternity. Now they sank again, and the singing rocked and swayed with the movement of the sea, and it gathered in love and in sadness, but it was a sadness full of relief, for they were singing the litany of the Blessed Virgin, and it gave a voice and words to the sorrow and hope and love that was their daily bread and the salt of their lives. It rocked and rocked their hearts with the movement of the sea. To the people of Riverside, the sea was always present in the hope, the fear, the waiting, the patience of the mothers and sweethearts of the men who were out in ships, present as they swept and washed and cooked, present in their dreams in the night. And the Mother of Christ was both Mother of men and Star of the sea. She shone above the tall masts of the storm-driven ships, and the waves of the sea rocked in her light. And at home the cradles of the seamen's children swung to and fro to the rhythm of the waves, rocked in the hands of the merciful Mother of Christ. She was their pride and their joy. The drabness and smeariness and mediocrity of life slipped away in the thought of her. She stood before the throne of God, their own and one of themselves. Tower of ivory, gate of heaven, morning star, pray for us. And in the city street and the narrow dark house, she was the white flower in the woods to them, the poetry and loveliness of their lives. Mater purissima, mater castissima, mater inviolata, mater intemerata, ora pro nobis. The cadence of their love rocked to and fro and flowed like waves round the foot of the monstrance. The girls who had skimpy, washed-out clothes, tawdry finery, and Woolworth's rings rejoiced because she, their mother, was a queen, queen of heaven, robed in its blue, crowned with its stars. The mothers, the old women, and the men put their cares into her hands, and the rhythm of their singing rocked them into rest. Salus infirmorum, refugium peccatorum, consolatrix afflictorum, auxilium Christianorum, ora pro nobis. Almost in the same breath, the litany flowed into the Tantum Ergo. Again the bell rang out, loud and sweet and solemn, the bell of benediction. It shivered into silence. Silence possessed the people. Silence possessed the whole of Riverside. Not the silence of emptiness, but of fullness, of a crescendo of expectation like a towering wave, gathered to the whole of its strength, lifted up to its full height, pausing in the moment of its utmost integrity before rolling on to fling itself forward and break upon the rocks. Father Smith lifted the great monstrance above the bowed heads, held it up for a moment before his plain face, suffused with love, as if he held the sun up, burning in his hands. Slowly he made the great sign of the cross with it, lowered it onto the altar, and knelt before it. The flowers on the altar breathed the shimmering breath of the candle flame. The incense rose in straight blue lines through the haze of gold. "Blessed be God," said the priest, and the wave broke, surging, tumbling, rushing forward in a torrent of praise. "Blessed be God," roared the people. "Blessed be God. Blessed be his holy name. Blessed be Jesus Christ, true God and true man. Blessed be the name of Jesus. Blessed be his most sacred heart. Blessed be Jesus in the most holy sacrament of the altar. Blessed be the great Mother of God, Mary most holy. Blessed be her holy and immaculate conception. Blessed be the name of Mary, Virgin and Mother. Blessed be Saint Joseph, her most chaste spouse. Blessed be God and his angels and his saints." Now the Adoremus rose, gentle as a caress and flowing over the sacred host, as Father Smith lifted it from the monstrance, put it back into the tabernacle, and locked the door. Benediction was over, but Miss Mulligar maintained the fervor of the people as they crowded out into the street by thundering an improvisation of her own on the organ, a triumphant potpourri of piety. A potpourri of piety. She must have known some organists in her life. Incorporating all the most loved hymns with the most familiar marches, a number of indescribable chords and discords, sudden, almost frivolous trills, and melodies suspiciously like the popular song hits of the day. Someone was waiting outside the church with news. "Willie is a little better." What a beautiful description of a holy hour. Okay. The beginning of the story began with a man named Timothy Green who was just walking through. I believe that's how we began. There's this man, Timothy Green, just walking through Riverside. And he has no idea what's going on, so people are explaining to him that Father Malone has just died, and they think that he's going to be their saint and all this stuff. This chapter is called Timothy Green, chapter 12. The opening quote is taken from Matthew. "He had compassion on them because they were distressed and lying like sheep that have no shepherd." On the day of Father Malone's death, when Timothy had stepped down from the bus into Riverside and unexpectedly into a crowd of angels and men exulting in an hour of sorrow, he had gone there for a paper on whose staff he was then working. The episode had nearly cost him his new job, for he came back without the story he went to collect and with another instead. But while the one wanted was of glamour spinning downhill to degradation in a dope shop on Riverside, the other was of human nature lifted above its weakness and misery to exaltation. It had no newspaper value. Had the dead priest worked a miracle, he would have gone straight from the last page obituary column to front page news and heavy type. But the only thing he had actually done was to die. Important, no doubt, from his own point of view, but too much usual from the point of view of the paper. But much too usual. Now, if he had sat bolt upright among, the editor supposed, sheaves of Madonna lilies and granted the reporter an interview, that would have been news, as good as an interview with Lazarus, or very nearly, but the editor put his pencil behind his ear, a habit peculiar to self-made men, and looked at Timothy. No doubt, he thought, a very clever young chap, and he will be useful to us in time, but it won't do for him to get religion. "It looks as if you have a slight attack of crowd hysteria," he said aloud. "Very catching, you know, crowd hysteria." "Yes, but it was over a week ago, and thinking it over calmly hasn't dulled my impression at all. Crowd hysteria doesn't work in retrospect. On the contrary, it brings on an immediate reaction. That's why people so often go wrong immediately after a revivalist meeting. The impressive thing was not simply that the people were so exultant, but that their joy was caused by bereavement. The wonderful sense I told you about of intense life was actually the result of a death. I can't help feeling that there is something big in my idea of articles on the testimony to truth springing up so spontaneously in the hearts of the people, or something like that." "Too vague, my boy. And anyhow, it does not make sense. Bereavement causing joy, death giving a sense to life? No. It doesn't make any sense, and it hasn't got any newspaper value." "Perhaps I haven't put it simply enough." Timothy turned scarlet. "I should say, sir, that the genius of running a paper is not giving people what they want, but what they need. For when people get what they want, they get a surfeit. No one can be surfeited with their need. They may want to be told that this life holds out real happiness, but they need to know that there is another life that goes on forever after death, and gives a meaning to things which, to the poor anyhow, are meaningless without it. In fact, sir, they need saints. Give the people a saint who proves in flesh and blood like their own that they are more than flesh and blood." The editor smiled, pursed his lips, gave a low whistle. "You've got it badly," he said, and he thought, "Presumptuous young puppy, but I rather like presumption in a youngster. Gets them somewhere." He leaned across his desk, tapping it with his forefinger to give force to his remarks, and feeling a sense of his own power surging happily in his veins, admonished Timothy. "So you think you know all about running a paper. What genius would do? Well, my boy, I've edited this paper long enough to know something about it too, and let me tell you this. The genius is not in giving them what they want or what they need, but what they'll pay for. People hate paying for their necessities. They'll pay for delusions and luxuries, and gladly. Look what an emotionally starved woman with a face like a bus will pay to delude herself she is Greta Garbo. If you want people to have salvation, you have got to give it to them free. Paying for it is like paying your light bill. In fact, most parsons find people have got to be bribed to take it. Of course, my boy, we cater for the religious sentimentality that's inherent in all of us, and we give them a bit of uplift from time to time. Here, hand me that file. Thank you. Yes, here we are. 2 series last year. Well-known parsons on what is emptying the churches, and well-known film stars on what I believe. But it's no good as a regular line, without a name behind it that's a kind of box office draw, so to speak. Take Saturday off, my boy. Get it out of your system. What do you do Saturdays? Play any games? No? Well, get out into the air anyway, and out of London." Timothy did take Saturday off, but he did not go out of London. On the contrary, he walked about her streets with his mind in turmoil. He went back to Riverside and visited Father O'Grady's church. He was appalled by its tawdriness, and by the first sight of some of its plaster saints, the effeminacy of the St. Aloysius, the sentimentality of its St. Therese of Lisieux. He sat in one of the benches and watched people come in and pray before these two. He watched, amazed by who came. Dock laborers and sailors, girls made up lavishly, policemen, mothers carrying babies and followed by little hordes of children who played in the aisle while their mothers prayed, and children who came alone to pray themselves, tiny girls who could only just walk, and rough little schoolboys who flung down onto their knees at a run. Timothy stared. and wondered what was the strength of this strange pair of saints that could draw men and women and children for such hurried, breathless moments of love from such hard, matter-of-fact lives to pray like this, with clenched hands and screwed-up eyes, like children who screw up their faces to pray harder. He went back to the West End and from one church to another, and he always encountered this young man with a lily and this young nun with roses covering her crucifix, and always people coming to them, looking to them for strength, for help, for hope. He thought of the boys and girls he knew, whistling to keep up their courage, snatching at every sensation, frittering away the love of life and the lust for life. He thought of the old people he knew, who dreaded their old age because they could not believe that they could be loved for anything but beauty and strength of body, and now that these were ebbing, they could not face a life with no love in it, stretching out into loneliness that only dreaded death could end. How soon all these people would be forgotten, and when their brief struggle and unrest and torment were ended, it would be as if they had never been. But these two, the young man with the lily, the girl with the roses, said St. Aloysius and St. Therese, right? Yeah. One dead for hundreds of years, the other for half a century, were alive now to all these people who brought them their hopes, their tears, their sorrows, and they would remain alive, immeasurable strength on earth, long after these people, too, were forgotten. What was their secret? What crystal water did they give to the world's fever? What was their answer to the shrill cry on the lips of the boys and girls, confused on the tongues of the aged and dying, the cry on the lips of the rich and the poor cradle to coffin? Life, life, life. At dusk he found himself in Leicester Square, and his environment suddenly became charged with the quality of nightmare. From every side, from behind him, in front of him, above him, flared one idea: sex as the object of life. Not sex that is an expression of love, of youth, of something pure and joyful, springing spontaneously from the loveliest in life, but something thrust upon the people by the avarice of men, cynical men who manufacture it in reels of gelatine and tablets and potions, who sit back in their clubs and offices and comfortable homes, made rich by exploiting the starved emotions of factory girls and clerks, of frustrated spinsters and frightened old people. Sex, sex, sex. It stared at him from every hoarding, every shop window, assailed him at every few yards on the pavement, blazed down on him from 1,000 electric lights, scorching him like shafts of fire. For the first time, he saw it objectively, as if he were outside of himself, as one is sometimes outside of oneself in a dream. He saw the young men of all the cities of the world, defenseless against avarice, with their pitiful wages that promised no home, no family, with their hungry souls that asked for bread and were given stones, with their starved nerves driven through with temptation, sweeping like flame down their spines and through the marrow of their bones. That was London, part of her evil that flared up suddenly to burn in the flood like a fever. But Timothy belonged to London. He belonged to her mists, her blue twilights, her lights like flowing stars, to those serene, more distant stars set widely apart in the dark vault of her disregarded skies. He belonged to her city, to her old gray buildings, her ghosts, to her towers and spires, and her courtyards with the hidden lawns and flowering trees, to her river with its swift, murmuring rhythm running through Southminster, with its sweet and bitter secrets of life on London docks, with the lights of the Houses of Parliament glittering across its tiny waves like a fall of burning leaves, with its stout little barges chugging up and down, its gaudy pleasure steamers, and its police boat, sinister and silent, ploughing to and fro past Cleopatra's Needle and the great black lions, patrolling the dark waters for that pitiful human drift for whom civilization had proved too cruel. He belonged to her hotels, her restaurants, her bars, her factories, her shops and power stations, her ships and warehouses, her pavements swarming with life. It was strange that the people who swarmed her pavements at night were the same as those who sat at ledgers behind cash desks and counters, crowded into restaurants and swung from straps by day. By day, the office world possessed them, took them to itself, in a kind of horrible transubstantiation. Each face became a face in a row of faces that were all alike, which, mirrored in the shop windows, was a multitudinous, inane, smiling face, accepting civilization as it is, despair. Each voice became a voice in a chorus of voices, a chorus of voices talking about food and girls and beer and cinemas. But at night, each one became himself. When London, like a magnificent old lady, put on the diamonds of her lights and stars, her children put on their own faces and spoke and wept and laughed in their own voices. Wow. Timothy turned away from the crowds and made his way to his lodging. He crept up the carpetless stairs as silently as he could, so as not to disturb the other lodgers. The house was dark and whispering. Below him, down the well of the stairs, he heard a door open and shut, and as he went into his room, another, close by him, opened and closed again gently like a secret. Footsteps passed his door, slippered footsteps. There was a little sighing through the house, a stair creaking, and silence. Silence that was taking possession of London as it took possession of the house. Gradually subsiding sounds, a broken, drunken singing rambling further and further away, note upon note of the passion, the tenderness, the loneliness, the despair of men, note upon note falling into the darkness and lying still. The only sound at last, the slow, steady footsteps of the policeman on point duty. The lights went out of the windows one by one, until at last only the street lamps marking long regular rows remained, and here and there a dull patch of gold or orange behind a drawn blind. Timothy thought of all the people he had noticed during the day, gone home now. He wondered what kind of homes they had. He thought of the homes of families, kind and solid, built on the rock of love. The home that is one small room when someone has taken root or has made a shell that is his armor. He thought that in this city even the homeless have homes, for it is the Londoner's unique gift to be able to make a corner into a doss house, or a chair in a workhouse, or even a bench in a park his own. Yet there were some real vagrants to whom just London herself, her skies and streets, were home. Those who wander from doss to doss, those who drift in the haze of drugs and go from one doubtful lodging to another, vanishing long before the house wakes in the morning, never twice in one place, nameless, homeless, drifting, always shadowed by the police who take them, when it becomes mercy to take them. And those poor bundles of humanity, roused from the blessed oblivion they had found on the embankment and woken by the policeman to the cold, the hunger, the craving for drink, for company, for something, anything to stir the blood, and told, "Keep moving, move along, keep moving." Now the people who stood out from the daytime in Timothy's mind passed before it in procession, to disappear into the darkness, moving down the shadowed alleyways and dark streets to sleep. The Italian with the barrel organ and the little monkey in a red doll's frock. The old, almost subhuman paper seller in the city, who looked as if he must live underground. The tumblers and jugglers who entertained the theater cues. The man not seen but heard as a harsh, beery voice under the Punch and Judy show in Edgware Road. The lovely old ma's who sold flowers at Oxford Circus, wrapped in their shawls, wearing gents' straw boaters and sitting by the great bonfires of chrysanthemums. The long, miserable line of young men with jutting Adam's apples, who stood day after day in the labor exchange, seeking the work they would loathe. The mincing, foxy-faced film extras, all the flotsam and jetsam of the world that haunts Wardour Street. The chestnut vendors of Tottenham Court Road rubbing their red, half-mittened hands together and keeping up a fidget that was almost a tap dance behind their glowing braziers. The poor old drunks, pitiful because they seemed lost and helpless, taken away by tolerant, kindly policemen and locked up, now laughing, weeping, or sleeping, as the drink took them, in the police court cells. People sleeping, lying in all the revealing, heart-breaking attitudes of sleep. People awake, as he was awake, in the night. People who were reading, sitting on the ring of a lamp's light, bowing beside the star of a candle's flame, leaving their sad material worlds, the empty grates, the dreadful washstands, the chipped enamel cans, the smeary tooth glasses, the thin patches in the middle of the threadbare mats, entering into realms of pure and holy thought, of philosophy, poetry, science, their minds expanding ring upon ring of light. He thought of the lives that would be revealed to one another if men could see through the thin walls that separate them, through the drawn blinds that hide them in the night. In his imagination he saw them, the families huddled together in overcrowded rooms, lying close to keep warm, the workers sunk down into their welcoming narrow beds, the aching weariness of the day seeping out of them, their clothes shaped to the shape of their work, the backs and shoulders of the coats rounded, the elbows worn thin, the alarm clock beside the bed ticking on relentlessly, counting off the seconds of the blessed oblivion. The drunkard sleeping fully clothed, sprawled across the unmade bed in his untidy room, mice fearlessly nibbling on the greasy plates left over from the last meal. Husband and wife lying side by side, content in the love that is whole, like harmony in music. The shy, half-frightened boy and girl, awake in the new wonder of passion drowning reason in its shining torrent. And illicit lovers, separated from the respectable matrons sleeping the heavy sleep of the well-nourished and unimaginative, only by thin walls of brick and plaster, trying to snatch moments of security, moments of release from loneliness, from homesickness, from frustration, from starvation of body and mind, tormented, cowering under the darkness as if it were a cover that could hide them from the morning's irrevocable crimson fingers that will tear them apart. And he thought of the ugly, loveless love-making, the travesty in Mayfair, in airless, curtained rooms, pranked out with gilded cherubim, fetid and furtive in Soho, in ornate back rooms behind rat-ridden narrow passages. He thought of children lying asleep, children in night nurseries at the top of narrow Georgian houses, children turning in the moonlight to see the reassuring bulk of the old nanny in her bed beside them, children with night lights burning in white saucers, comforting as the Star of Bethlehem, children clasping ugly old loved dolls, dolls with noses flattened out by continual embraces, children sleeping with their mouths slightly open, their flushed cheeks warm and rosy, their soft hair like curling sprays of golden fern upon their pillows, parents coming into the quiet rooms where children are sleeping, looking down on them with meditative eyes of love, shading the candles with hands like small dark wings, children in hospitals, side by side in rows of cots and long white wards, the nurses smelling of linen and verbena, passing silently from cot to cot, observing each one in turn. I think Timothy has got religion. Timothy thought, "While I am here, secure and alone in this sleeping house, the hospitals are awake. The ambulance is hurrying through the streets. In the hospital, there is hard white light. The surgeons are at work, masked and gloved and gowned, working under the great lights in the theater, working under the great arc lights in the theater. In the waiting room, men and women live through their lives' agony. The old mother, dazed, tremulous, woken suddenly in the night. The young husband, dumb and white. The friend huddling into her coat. The agony of suspense aggravated by the cold. Their mouths are dry. They cannot speak even to one another. Silently, swiftly, efficiently, the surgeons are working. Out there in the darkness, in Bloomsbury, in Kensington, in Bayswater, blameless old ladies sleep with wide open hands like children who have placed their trust in God. The dark color of the night is ebbing away. The hour at which human life burns down, at which man's vitality sinks to its lowest ebb, is close. Innocence lies sleeping and evil wakes. Thieves enter closely shuttered rooms, move on silent feet, work swiftly with gloved hands, look down unmoved on the defenseless faces and silver hair of innocents asleep. Out there in the muffling velvet silence, in the hour before dawn, when just before its ebbing darkness thickens and clots, murder is done. Behind one of those blind windows, someone unsuspicious, unprepared for death, is being murdered. Darkness thins, diluted with faint silver. Shadows gather round lights that are burning out as darkness moves slowly into light. Someone's life moves gently into eternity, surrounded by those they love. Someone is dying, and someone is being born. So the life of London passes through another night, swiftly, secretly, irrevocably, like sand falling silently through a dark hourglass. Sitting at his open window and sometimes falling asleep, sometimes wide awake, Timothy's mind reaches out to his fellow men. He is conscious of his kinship with them, of his oneness with them in the suffering common to them all, the fear, the loneliness, the thirst and hunger common to all men, in the common need to love and be loved, to forgive and be forgiven. A loud cry goes out from his heart, and though his lips are silent, "Let me go down into the depths with you. Give me my part, my heritage in your pain, your struggle, your dreams. Lift me up on the wings of your ultimate longing. Sink me in the depths of your deepest misery. Brand me with the brand of your shame. Receive me because I am a man, into the heart of mankind. Unknown to him, other young men had risen in the night from hard, narrow beds, from tranquil sleep, sleep as white and pure as the shadow of light on milk. Contemplatives who have offered themselves to receive the world's wounds, who know all mankind in one man, wounded with all men's wounding, the man, Christ on the cross. These young men, unknown to him, have offered to his inarticulate heart, have offered his inarticulate heart. At dusk, at midnight, at dawn, in the ordered loveliness of measured, age-long song that hushes the seraphim before the throne of God. When drift of silver and weaving shadows gradually gives place to the unbroken light of dawn, when the stars have burnt out and the austere heavens, bleached of the colors of the night, fill with morning light wide and unbroken, like slowly welling, shadowless water, Timothy lies down and sleeps. As he drifts into sleep, he remembers the plaster saints again, standing alone now in the dark locked churches, the flames and the flowers withered at their feet, the boy with his lilies, the girl with her roses, still withholding their secret from him. But the secret is nearly told. Already its radiance shines faintly in his mind. It already touches his heart with its warmth, like the light of the sun touching the flower it is just going to open. Timothy sleeps. He is alone, and yet there is a presence in the room, a presence that expands in his heart and fills the silence, a presence as elusive as soundless music and remembered in the mind, yet as close and tender as two hands covering a child's eyes, and a voice of tenderness saying, "Who am I? Guess who I am. Guess who it is. Who loves you?" Well, that's Caryll Houselander's rendition of Somebody Having a Moment of Grace. Kind of reminds me of Flannery O'Connor, actually. Just that his eyes are open and he sees these like bestial qualities in his fellow humans. Gonna move this a little bit. There we go. Let's hope this isn't ruining the sound. Okay. 2 chapters down. Let's see. We have chapter 13 next. I think I can do it. Ooh, and then after that, this is the Green Leaf, and then we have Solly Lee. He's a funny character. Okay, chapter 13, The Green Leaf. The opening quote is taken from Mark. "Now of the fig tree learn ye a parable. When the branch thereof is now tender, and the leaves are come forth, you know that summer is very near." No sooner had Timothy informed those few people who might have felt injured, had he not taken them into his confidence, of his intention to become a Catholic, than he found his soul, the existence of which he had himself but recently recognized, the center of a whirlpool of indignation and distress. Godparents, relations, old family friends, known to him until now only as faded photographs and albums, materialized in the shape of pompous letters of warning and remonstrance. Countless reasons were offered to explain, or, in the case of the more charitable, to excuse his conduct. Had he been crossed in love? Spent an unhappy childhood? Was he anemic? Was he not carried away by emotion, by the music and the incense? Had some Jesuit got hold of him? Was he eating too little? Or an ill-balanced diet? One, however, a sister of his mother's, whom he had not seen since he was 6 years old, blamed herself. Had she wrote, given her nephew a Bible before he joined a religion which forbade it, he might have been saved. As it was, both he and she were damned. His father discovered that in spite of his own apparent lifelong indifference to all religion, he was devoted to what now he called the national church, though not indeed so much from motives of loyalty to God as to the conservative government. He saw in Timothy's conversion, however, exactly what he had always foreseen. It was to be expected from his lack of enthusiasm for football. It was, moreover, besides, an act of disloyalty to his country, a flagrant violation of the commandment to honor your father and your mother. Mr. Green looked this commandment up to make sure that it existed while writing the letter. As to Timothy's mother, she remembered tearfully that her mother was a devout churchwoman, and herself went to church on the Christmas day of that year, and shed a few tears of self-pity because of her son's curious conduct. Unable to formulate any arguments herself, she insisted on his coming to tea with an old family friend who, having spent a few holidays abroad, knew all about the abuses of the Roman clergy in the southern climate. She would, his mother hoped, snatch Timothy as a brand from the burning while enjoying her homemade muffins. She did her best, poor lady, both to snatch the young man from perdition and to enjoy the muffins. In both attempts, she failed. That's funny. She told him of the vast quantities of tobacco smoked by priests in Spain, the vast quantities of red wine consumed by priests in Italy, the vast quantities of rich food devoured by priests everywhere. She mentioned the huge sums of money spent in absolution and candles, and the cruelty of Roman Catholics to ponies in Portugal, to bulls in Spain, and to dogs everywhere, except in England, where, of course, Roman Catholics and even Roman Catholic priests are not quite so bad as everywhere else. This is so funny. None of this seemed to be effective, so she lowered her voice and, reaching a blue-veined, ringed hand for a second muffin, introduced the sale of indulgences, the Borgias, the rumors about the Vatican choir in the Middle Ages, walled-up nuns, the skeletons of infants under convent floors, and Pope Joan. When Timothy had gone, she turned her attention to consoling his mother. "You worry too much," she said. "After all, there are some good priests in Romanism. Take this fish on Friday business. It is very healthy. As a nation, we eat too much meat, far too much." But that which affected Timothy was the attitude of his own friends. He discovered them capable of unimagined bigotry and narrowness. He was a coward, they said, afraid of life, afraid of thought. Eric raved and called him a traitor to humanity, but bitterest of all was Peter. The first friend Timothy had made after he left home was Eric Jacobs, who lived in the same lodgings and flattered him by trying to indoctrinate him with the idealized communism that was his own creed. He assured Timothy that the future, and particularly the inevitable revolution, was in the hands of youth. Youth would march into the future to lay hold of, to grasp, to seize its glorious heritage of life, of light. For this they must be willing to deny themselves, to live at present in the most hazardous and uncomfortable fashion. That, however, was good. Everyone was too soft, and everything they suffered made them realize the brotherhood of man. Eric said all this with such passion that Timothy, delighted by the flattery of his saying it to him, had accepted it without thought or question, the phrase brotherhood of man, kindled a fire in his mind. Eric had many magazines from Soviet Russia illustrating his points. They showed photographs of mass formations of strapping young men and women, forming living emblems of the Soviet ideology, the hammer and sickle, the red star, the name of Lenin, and so on. There were seldom fewer than 1,000 or so in one photograph, excepting when it illustrated collected farming. Then there were smaller groups in order to leave room on the film for the action of huzzahing, or giving the salute of the clenched fist, or embracing a girl in a frenzy of enthusiasm for a mechanical plow. It was Eric who had whispered to Timothy that Peter, Piotr, as he was called by his friends, was the founder, leader, and inspiration of a secret organization of communists. There was no need to whisper, as the two young men were alone, but Eric's monotonous life was invigorated by the sense of mystery, indeed of conspiracy. As a tired man's blood is invigorated by strong wine. He thrilled to it as a schoolboy does to his secret society. And it gave him the pathetic importance of a child who says to the others, "I've got a secret," and whose only secret is that he has none. He took Timothy, after swearing him to secrecy, to Peter's studio, a room up 4 flights of carpetless stairs, at the top of the house, furnished true to convention with packing cases and a camp bed. I've got to pour myself some more water in a big water jug because I'm drinking water from a glass, which I understand to be kind of rare these days. It's always a plastic bottle or stainless steel. But this is a glass. Okay. Getting a little tongue-tied, so I'm going to try and not do that. Opposite the door as they came in was a long window that framed Peter against a deep blue sky and a blaze of stars. Standing there against the night, a scarlet handkerchief knotted round his throat, he looked like a painted saint in an old Russian icon. His darkly golden face was long and thin. He had the luminous almond-shaped eyes of the Byzantine saints and the lock of black hair falling over his forehead. But contradicting the strength of his ascetic face, his hands were the ineffectual but beautiful hands of a neurotic. Man, she is just, like, brutal to people that, I don't know, she really picks things apart to me. An oil stove, smelling atrociously, filled the room with a thick treacle of heat. Round it, Peter's disciples sat on the floor. Timothy never forgot his first impression of them. The little half-caste Burmese, the West Indian girl singing to herself in a whisper and rocking to and fro as she sang. The old German street musician who had once played his fiddle to adoring audiences in Berlin. The minute Japanese waitress with the face like a flower, who sat always in the attitude of bowing. The Scotch pavement artist, with chilblains on every finger. The handful of Italian models of the old school, wearing huge rings bought in the Caledonian market. And half a dozen or so more, all of different races and colors, as if they were carved out of different beautiful woods, mahogany, walnut, chestnut, beech, and maple and lime, and one that looked like pale, polished ivory. They were misfits and outcasts. In time, Timothy came to know them all and to think of them secretly as lost children, for even the old among them were held at some point in an unhappy childhood, at which they had become dislocated from their own happiness forever. Children, for the most part, of loveless, lost homes, of divorce. Children whose faith in God had been shattered long ago by a father or mother who was God to them and had broken faith. They carried through life the betrayed hearts of cynical children, rootless, carrying homelessness within themselves, imparting loneliness even in their affections. Wow, that's the heart of the matter. Imparting loneliness even in their affections. On that night, as on every night, they were round the stove eating the watery stew that was always to be had at Peter's, for, though he was poor himself and often hungry, he worked the little miracle of always having something to give by giving all he had. But it was not only stew that Peter gave to his followers. He gave them a spark of belief in themselves. He gave their poverty an honorable place. When Timothy first saw him, he was standing making a little speech, indoctrinating them with his dreams, and his dreams were a soothing drug to them, they whose failures were to master the misery of mankind. From their ideals a world would come, a new world without poverty. The rich, magnetic voice went on and on. Meanwhile, there was comfort here and now in one another's company, and in the warmth of the stove and the goodness of the stew. What was the secret of the power that Peter had over them all, even over Timothy? It was surely that Peter, who denied the Spirit, who defied and despised religion, who was obsessed by the material ideal, was in fact dyed through and through with the color of the Christianity that he denied. He was by nature ascetic. He was not alone easy. It was not alone easy, but inevitable to him to deny himself, to suffer cold and hunger, to lie on a hard bed, to belong to no one, though he was given to everyone. He had within him, though he would have been astonished to know it, the instinct that has sent generations of pilgrims from Russia to Jerusalem, the call from illimitable distance, heard as if it were a whisper within one's own heart, mysterious as the migration of birds, that makes all things as nothing compared to the sweetness of the hard way that is the incommunicable secret of pilgrims. In an over-civilized world, he had the primitive soul of a Russian peasant who, if he is deprived of the knowledge of the true God, makes his own idols from whatever looks bigger than man, machinery, for example, transformed by a capital M to the machine, and so given the mystery of vast, inhuman personality. He had, too, the instinct of the Russians of the old school, even of the degenerate among its aristocracy, to go down to the humiliated and the oppressed, to discover the humiliated, suffering Christ in the dregs of humanity. He did not recognize who it was that he sought, but the drag was there at his heart in unappeasable, gnawing compassion. He was burnt up by a bright and terrible fire which, starved for fuel, consumed itself in the blaze of its own beauty. Timothy spent nearly every evening in Peter's studio. There he listened by the hour to Peter's talk, and it swept through his mind like blown fire. He came also to love Peter's disciples and to delight in their company. He laughed with the Italian models who were for the most part out of work, or used only by art schools. Antonio. Okay, so it's an Italian. I'm going to try an Italian accent, because this is practice. Practice. Antonio. Artists nowadays, old Antonio told him with a contemptuous gesture. Artists nowadays do not wish to paint the miracle, the beauty of the human body. No, they prefer to waste many tubes of paint and paint miles of canvas on their own subconscious. And had Timothy seen what the subconscious of the artists is like, it is a mix-up of faulty geometrical instruments, severed limbs, and decomposing fruit. At least so it is in the case of the more lucid, but most of the artists are worse even than that. They are paranoics. Now you can believe it. They prefer to paint a paranoid nightmare. Paranoid. To the beautiful body of his little daughter, Violetta. Now look at her. Is she not pure and young and lovely? Is she not like Venus rising from the sea at dawn? Can you not see the ripple of the shallow waves in her every movement? The drift of the virgin light. Sorry. The drift of the virgin light of dawn in the sweet mobile face. Pah! The so-called artists. Where can you find me one who could look Botticelli in the face? The Burmese, who makes beautifully lacquered boxes with such conscious craftsmanship that they take too long to do and can only be sold at a loss, breaks in irreverently. In the parlor, Auntie Nellie, dusting down her Botticelli. Antonio sighs and goes on. And how then do we live? We models of the old school, of the great traditions? By collecting and selling old bottles. Yes, Violetta, the despised Venus, goes round all the studios collecting empty bottles. And believe me, these paranoics have plenty of empty bottles. On the sale of these we must live. Ah, alas. And Timothy goes over to the corner where Piotrov is trying to comfort the little Japanese girl. She has a contract to remain 3 more years in London. It is not that anyone is cruel, she has plenty to eat, but it is so ugly. She does not think that she will live for 3 years without seeing the almond trees in bloom. There are, says Timothy, almond trees in St. John's Wood. But she does not answer. Shall he take her there to see them on Saturday? She shakes her head, but thanks him. Tears flow silently down her face, like little drops of crystal flowing over gold. You see, says Timothy to Peter and Eric, that little creature has security, but she is profoundly unhappy. It seems that her own personality is a kind of flowering and cannot be conditioned to this ugliness. Her life is withering. When she goes back to Japan, she'll be all withered up, dead. Eric says, Don't imagine that capitalism is not destroying Japan, too. Go into our big people's stores and look at the cheap, flimsy garments and things that are made in Japan, and look at the price of them, and ask yourself who made them, and how, and for how much. Sweated labor, that's what we import. Flowers. Nevertheless, Peter brings a huge bunch of flowers to the little waitress, and though they disagree more and more, he and Timothy never quarrel. Peter is hard and determined, but Peter nurses his friends as tenderly as any woman when they are ill. Peter believes in the sword and realism, but he has the urchins of the whole district on his knees and tells them stories that spring out of Russia, out of the old holy Russia, Stories of bears, dancing bears, talking bears, thinking bears, in the tall green forests. Peter believes in utility, and he sees that the aged are no longer useful and are a drag on the state. But he meets the old blind beggar every night and brings him in. He puts his one basket armchair by the stove and reserves it for the old street musician. Peter believes that Christianity is a drug for the people, but he wipes the blood and sweat and tears from the eternal face that he does not recognize. From Peter, at least, Timothy expected tolerance, but he was the most intolerant, the most pitiless of all. Wholly illogically, he took the conversion not only as a betrayal of the poor and the outcast, but as a personal offense, a wound inflicted upon himself. It was, he said, an absolute breach, the end between them. The studio door would be shut to Timothy. But what had made him do this? Timothy had longed for someone to ask that question, instead, as they all did, of answering it and answering it wrongly. But now that he was asked, he could not answer. Peter stood in front of him, his hand flung out, open, waiting, as it were, for Timothy to put the answer into it, and Timothy, longing to give the incommunicable secret, stood before him, mute. Near the offices of Timothy's paper there was a tree, a little stunted tree, black with soot and ringed by a circle of iron railings, put up long ago in the reign of Queen Victoria. There must have been a board meeting about it, at which pompous gentlemen in black coats decided that the little tree was worth preserving, for it had value for the city of London, that it belonged to her children and to her children's children, that it was in fact a sacred trust like an orphan. For these reasons, and for the further reason of a secret, incomprehensible fluttering, like a flutter of butterflies in the pompous gentleman's blood, it was worthy of the cost, the labor, the red tape involved in providing it with the support of iron railings. What positive lyrical grace breathed in the souls of the gentlemen on that occasion, ruffling the surface of their complacency like a breeze on an April morning, urging them to action, which, though somewhat ridiculous in itself, as the little tree needed no support but its own life, was nevertheless an act of faith in life and loveliness, and in man's response to life and loveliness. That was all a question. Okay. I don't think I'm going to last 2 hours here. I'm going to read that again. What positive lyrical grace breathed in the souls of the gentlemen on that occasion, ruffling the surface of their complacency like a breeze on an April morning, urging them to action, which, though somewhat ridiculous in itself, as the little tree needed no support but its own life, was nevertheless an act of faith in life and loveliness, and in man's response to life and loveliness. Their faith was 1,000,000 times justified, since they themselves had entered into eternal life. Generation after generation of men had lifted their hearts when they passed the little tree. Among them, Timothy's fellow workers. As they passed on the morning when the first spark of green showed on the black twig, they looked up, and one by one their faces lit, like white candles that a spark has suddenly made beautiful with flame. Hunger for thirst burnt visibly on their lifted faces, and Timothy had an answer to that hunger in his soul. For on the very day that the green leaf broke into life on the stunted tree, he had been received into the Catholic Church. Oh, what a beautiful analogy. After the warnings of his well-wishers concerning the avidity with which the Catholic hierarchy would fall on him, Timothy met with what perhaps, only in view of his expectations, was discouragement even from them. He had, of course, the usual experience of waiting on the presbytery steps, and ultimately, just when his courage was faltering and he was meditating a retreat, of being confronted by an apparition that bore out all the lowest and softest whispers of the family friend, someone between a policeman and a monk, confronting him almost menacingly. Excuse me. Those who answer doors at presbyteries. She loves this character. "Can I see a priest?" Timothy said feebly. "Which?" "Anyone. They're at dinner." "I could wait." The apparition paused and peered down into Timothy's face. "I'm short-sighted," he said. "Are ye by any chance a sick call?" "A what?" "A sick call. Are ye in danger of death?" "Oh, no. At least I wasn't." "Well, that's a pity for ye. If ye were in danger of death, I could tell father before the pudding." When the priest came at last, he was a gentle, rather remote old man, so white in the face and hair, so pink in the nose that he resembled a white dormouse. He looked permanently cold, and no wonder, for the house was fireless and chill. He peered sadly at Timothy, as if he were very sorry for him, before speaking, and then, "Well, now," he said, "what is your trouble?" "I want to become a Catholic." Dear me, you do. Well, now, what has put that idea into your head?" "I I don't exactly know. At least, I can't put it into words." Well, never mind. Do you know who made you?" "God." "Now, that's perfectly correct. It was God. There isn't a shred of doubt about that. And now, do you know why God made you?" Timothy was silent. He had not thought of that. At last he said sheepishly, "No, I can't say I do." "Well, now, never mind. To tell you the truth, there are a great many people who do not know why God made them. That is why there are so many unhappy people in the world. You take this little book and learn the answer. And don't worry. Take it easy." Timothy went away with a penny catechism in his pocket, lonelier than he had ever been, even as that loneliest of all creatures, a little child. 3 months later, he was received into the church. On the night before, he set his alarm clock and woke at every hour until morning, in case it did not wake him. But it did, and it seemed strange, though in keeping with everything else, that an alarm clock, not a peal of bells or song of angels, should call him to be born again. The charwoman who swept and dusted the church witnessed his reception. She was an old hand at it, having stood side by side with many a solitary convert's guardian angel, a foster mother of waifs and strays on the doorstep of heaven. So reassuring was she with her poor orphans that it was almost alarming, like the alarming brightness of the dentist's assistant, whose work is to coax the patient to the ordeal and to face the agony to end. And to face the agony to end agony manfully. Whose work is to coax the patient to the ordeal and to face the agony to end agony manfully. "Don't worry now," she said. You'll feel better when you've made your confession, and mind you, tell the whoppers first. And when it's all over, you shall have a nice cup of tea, or you won't be going to your Holy Communion, as you won't be going to your Holy Communion until tomorrow. Oh, I've seen many young men and a few old ones come into the church, same as I've seen lots of people come into the world and go out of it. My mother had a real devotion to the dying, and it's many a happy death I've helped her to lay out. Timothy nodded. He knew with emotionless joy that the candle of faith that the priest put into his hand was the candle that would be burning by his coffin, that the hands he folded now he folded over his dead heart, that the will that he pledged was the gift both of his life and the homage of his dust. He said his act of faith like a child reciting a lesson, and when it was all over, he made the sign of the cross on leaving the church. He realized the wonder of the sign and marveled, but still impersonally, as if he was thinking of another man. He was going back to the office now, in the name and power of the Trinity. He, the hollow man, who an hour ago had no power at all. He looked and felt just the same as before, but before he was powerless. Now he was going out in the power of Christ's love. He saw the significance, the shape, and the size of the sign of the cross as he would not see it again, covering him, his mind, his shoulders, his heart. He saw it now objectively, as we only see what is new to us, as we see new faces, new people, whom, when we know and love or hate, we shall see changed by our own conception of them, or shall not see at all, because they have been taken too close. Now he saw the shape of the cross, man's mind the shaft of it pointing heavenwards. And he saw his shoulders taking on the world's suffering in Christ's power, and his arms reaching out to left and right in the stretch of his mercy, and his heart, the center of the great road and the source of his love, the horizontal beam driving down into the earth, and the sap of life rising from its roots. He walked to the office, and no red flowers sprang up out of the pavement where he walked, and there was nothing at all to mark the wonder of that day. But on that day the leaf pierced the hard wood of the little black tree with life, the tree that was rooted in the poor, sooty earth of the London square, and there was a voiceless sursum corda, up with your hearts, in the city. That's beautiful. Okay, that wasn't a full 2 hours, almost an hour and a half. So we're not going to read the chapter about Solly Lee because I am making so many mistakes reading. I hope to do another one on Tuesday. Then we will read Solly Lee. That's next Tuesday. I think it's the 22nd. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.